Welcome to the podcast, Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans. I am honored to have our guest, Melissa Davis, for the interview. Melissa Davis is an educational consultant, former classroom teacher of nearly 20 years, and the founder of Education Advisors, LLC. Melissa partners with schools and communities to help shift from reactive discipline to proactive, inclusive practices that support the whole child, academically, emotionally, and behaviorally. As a teen, Melissa was the student many teachers would have labeled perfect on paper, high achieving, organized, and hardworking. But beneath the surface, she struggled with confidence, body image, and a deep sense of not belonging. Those silent struggles eventually led to an eating disorder until acting gave her a space to express herself, build confidence, and begin trusting her own voice. That experience shaped everything that followed. Feeling overlooked and misunderstood as a teen gave Melissa a deep empathy for students whose challenges show up through behavior. It's what drew her into education, special education, and ultimately into the work she does today, helping adults see behavior not as defiance, but as communication, and reminds us that every child deserves someone willing to look beyond the surface and keep showing up. You're listening to Today's Leaders, from Teens to Titans. Hi, I'm Lorraine Connell, a teen leadership coach. I transitioned from teaching chemistry to coaching teens in leadership, helping them realize they can do hard things. We've often believed that leadership is an innate trait, but it's actually a skill that you build and improve. On this show, you'll meet today's leaders who share their teenage experiences, revealing how they developed confidence, direction, and the tools to become the leaders they are now. You'll discover how you or the teens in your life have the potential to become confident leaders, even if it doesn't seem possible. Welcome, Melissa. I am so grateful to have you here today.
Oh, pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So I ask all of my guests to go back in time and take a trip down memory lane. Talk to us about who Melissa was as a teenager and share how those experiences helped shape you into the person that we see before us.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Going back, right, into teenage land is always a little scary, I feel like, because the Melissa back then is very different than the Melissa that I am now. So I grew up in a very small town in rural New Hampshire, and I'm an only child. And so teenage years are definitely quite interesting, being an only child in a small town in rural New Hampshire. But I feel like, as a lot of teenagers do, I just felt really alone a lot of the time. Grades were extremely important to my parents, and they put a lot of outside pressure on me to get good grades. In fact, I have a very strong recollection of one conversation with my mom in which she said, "Oh, you have a B, what's wrong?" And for me, it was more like, well, nothing's wrong. It's just, this is a difficult class. But I feel like kind of having those outside pressures from my parents to always do well, to, education's so important. You have to make sure you do well in school. You have to make sure you go to college, really kind of set the tone for me as a student, right? So I was, the student who always did their work, who always got their work done on time, who always made sure that I was doing the extra credit projects, who stayed after school for tutoring, who did all of these things. But on the inside, I felt like, because I was kind of being so controlled on the outside, that the inside of me didn't feel like I was in control at all. I was always a child who grew up who would be considered obese if you looked at the BMI scale that so many doctors do. And I always had problems with my weight. And I feel like also growing up in the 90s was not really great for that. When you have plus size models who are size like 8 on the runway, and you have all of the magazines that teenagers would read, Cosmopolitan and all of those things that just kind of showed what the perfect body looked like. And then also kind of seeing that even in my own family, there was no really positive relationship with food. So food was definitely a way that we celebrated everything. Food was also a way that we celebrated when we weren't feeling well. Food was kind of, instead of talking about our feelings, it was more of like, well, you're having a bad day, have a cookie. You just got an A on your test, have a piece of cake, like those types of things. So I felt all throughout my childhood and growing up that I really didn't have a good relationship with food throughout. And that really kind of spiraled into high school. I was bullied tremendously because of my weight. In fact, I have the bully's name in my brain, but I'm not going to say it out loud because I'm not going to put him on blast. But I strongly remember sitting in a class and having him push on the back of my seat because he sat right behind me. And when he did so, he laughed because he said that I weighed too much and the chair couldn't move. And so at that point, I had kind of learned that, okay, well, I have to do something to change this. I just don't really know how. And so my mom not having a good body image as well, and also seeing her struggle with her weight and seeing her yo-yo dieting, which, is very common in that time period of which I grew up. It was very much Atkins and all of those crazy things that people were doing. There was no one that I could really turn to kind of help me with that. So I kind of just did it myself. And what that looked like was me starting to work out 7 days a week for an hour to an hour and a half a day after school. And then when I started seeing results from that, but then kind of plateaued, I ended up then changing my diet in which I became anorexic and I didn't eat. And I would go days sometimes without eating. My parents we'd sit down every night at dinner and I'd just kind of push the food around on my plate and take a few bites here and there and not ingest anything. I remember a good portion of my high school years, I would shower in the morning before I go to school and just like going down and taking a quick shower and then leaving the water running and just kind of laying on the bathroom floor because I was so exhausted. But I had to keep pushing through, right? You have to keep going. You don't talk about your feelings. You just kind of keep going and put a smile on your face and pretend everything's okay. So I did that for probably about 2 years and I dropped a significant amount of weight. And I think that was also difficult as well because I kept getting the attention of like, oh, wow, you look great. You look fabulous. Like, oh, tell me your secrets. What are you doing? And of course, you can't come out and say, oh, well, I'm just not eating. That's my secret. But kind of struggling with that and not feeling like I could turn to anyone, not feeling like I could go to anyone for help with it and feeling like, oh, well, it's working and I'm not being teased anymore. And people think I look great and I'm getting attention and, this is fine. So I did that for a couple of years. And it wasn't until I started dating my high school boyfriend at the time that's when he kind of said, this isn't right. We've gone out on, a couple of dates and like you've eaten 3 bites of food. And like, I know you didn't have lunch today because I was with you. And so he was the one who kind of, I wouldn't say repaired my relationship with food because I still feel like to this day, it's just still a work in progress. But he kind of helped me realize that what I was doing was not okay. And so at that point, I just kind of started slowly introducing foods back into my diet, still working out, but then of course my weight began to fluctuate again. And it was through this time and meeting him as well, I became really involved in our theater in school. I was always in chorus and sang and things like that. And I did plays kind of throughout late elementary school and middle school, but it was really kind of in high school where I found that group of friends that stood behind me and supported me and would not really let me not eat, essentially. Like, we'd go to practice and they'd be like, we're going to go get a sandwich. You can come, you can get a sandwich or a salad, but you need to have something. And it's kind of crazy that, I put this on other teenage friends of mine, but they were really the ones to kind of help support me and help kind of get me through that time to become healthier and to know kind of what I should and shouldn't be doing with that. Yeah. So going up on stage it allowed me to be someone who I wasn't, right? And it was something that I cherished so much because I was the shy, quiet kid that didn't always kept their head down, always did what they were supposed to. And so on the stage, I could be boisterous and I could be loud and I could, say my feelings and things like that through a character. Yeah. And so it kind of allowed me to have that, which I think is probably why I feel so comfortable public speaking today because I don't mind getting up in front front of people. I've, talked to some people like, oh my gosh, I could never stand in front of people and talk. And for me, it's like, well, it's almost like not that I'm playing a role, but it's just kind of like I, want to connect with people. And this is the way that I do it. And I feel so
Yeah.
comfortable doing that because I had to do it kind of my whole life.
It's funny. It sounds like drama connected you to yourself, and now you use that connection building in the way that you present for other people, right? So
Yeah.
you see that link of, well, being able to act and be on stage allowed me to connect with myself. It's not that much of an extension to then extend the connection to the people that are in the room with me.
Yeah. And I think also, too, I've kind of learned how to deal with tough issues through humor, right? And kind of making light of some situations, not in a way that's like offending or anything like that, but just kind of make light of some stuff that's heavy for people to kind of manage. And I think I found that through, especially through plays and then through theater, but also just kind of living the life that I live. So when it comes to me like teaching people about behavior can be a really tricky thing because it's triggering for a lot of us, right? It's triggering for the teachers involved, it's triggering for the kids involved, and it's kind of a heavy topic. So even being able to, stand up and be like, hey, I made these mistakes too, or, like not only do my kids have ADHD, but I feel like my dog has ADHD. And but I was
Mhm.
like, maybe I have something here. So I actually went to a former principal of mine and said, here's kind of what I'm like spitballing. What are your thoughts? And he was like, I think we have a need for that. And then as soon as I kind of announced that I was going to do behavior, it was like one talk after another just kept getting booked. And it's just kind of been a snowball after that.
That is such a like perfect direction to like see the need, have the solution, be willing to put yourself out there and just sort of like give teachers the opportunity to have their own success. I think, a lot of the work that I do is allowing kids to see that they can be successful, and when they finally know that they can be successful, it just like opens the gate, and now they are successful in a lot of ways. And I think it's probably very similar for a teacher, right? Like once they can get and be successful with one challenging kid, then it's like, oh, well, maybe I can try that with this kid, and maybe I can try that with that girl, and this and that. And then the floodgates open, and it's like there are other strategies. And I think we're so afraid of, I mean, honestly, we are so afraid of failure. We're so
Yeah.
afraid of making a mistake
Yeah.
ourselves
Yeah.
that when a child presents themselves as a challenge to us, instead of engaging, we pretend the challenge doesn't exist so that failure is already designed and it's
Yeah.
not my failure.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I also think too, I know for myself, we're seeing a lot of teachers that are coming into the teaching profession as a secondary career, right? Which is wonderful because I think everyone should be a teacher at some point in their life. I also feel like everyone should also like wait tables at some point in their life to kind of learn about just kind of how to manage with people, right? And deal with people who are mad at you and all sorts of things. But I feel like everyone should teach us, at some point. But it's been really kind of interesting to see too, you have people that are coming into education that don't necessarily have kind of that undergrad background in managing behaviors. And I also think too that colleges are not necessarily doing a great job preparing new teachers with the behaviors that we're seeing in general ed classes these days. So for new teachers to come in and for teachers who are coming in with not having that education background, it's difficult to be put in front of a classroom of, 20 to 30 kids. And now you have 7 on IEPs and 3 of them on 504s, and 2 of them have behavior intervention plans, and one of them's going through MTSS for behavior. And it's kind of like, how do I know what tools in my toolbox that I have? Also, my goal is to kind of, especially with teachers, is for them to figure out what tools can I reach in and pull out immediately. Like if you have a leak, you're not going to reach in and pull out, electrical tape, right? So you're going to reach in and pull out the wrench that you need. A lot of teachers do have some of these tools,
Yeah.
but how can you recognize right away what tools do I need right now? So then that way we can get everyone back to status quo. And that I feel like is so important. And I want to leave teachers feeling empowered of like, okay, I have these tools in my toolbox that I may know already, but now I know how to figure out which tool I need for what job.
Yeah. And I guess the word or the term that we use often is classroom management or behavior management. And I think that sets so many people up for failure and mistakes right from the get-go.
Yeah.
I remember my method of managing behaviors and classrooms was to like sort of identify who this kid was before I knew who they were
Yeah.
and place them in a box without any real data,
Yeah.
like how do you enter my classroom? Oh, you're a quiet student. Oh, you're a smart, and no real evidence. So tell me how you sort of break that mentality of I've got to manage this classroom. I've got to manage behavior.
Yeah. So I think one of the big things that I like to think about behavior is it is a form of communication. And I also think of behavior, if you have maladaptive behaviors in a classroom or even at home, it's a child that has a lack of skill.
If you're listening to this podcast, you're already part of something bigger. You're part of my advocacy team. Leaders of Today and Peers Not Fears exist to amplify voices at the age when so many of us were having moments that shaped who we became, sometimes in silence, sometimes without support. These conversations are about what happens when voices are heard earlier, when leadership is named, and when young people are reminded that they matter. As we move from building these programs to sharing them more widely, my ask is simple. Help us carry these stories forward. Share an episode, talk about the work, pass it along to someone who works with youth, supports teens, or believes in the power of early leadership. Because when we normalize telling these stories and believing in young voices, we don't just change individual lives, we change what's possible.
And I always like to use that term because as teachers, we teach lack of skill every single day. Yeah, exactly. If a kid doesn't know how to read, we teach them how to sound out words. If a kid doesn't know how to add 2 numbers together, we give them strategies on how to go about doing that, right? We're constantly teaching to lack skill. So a lot of times, especially like if I get called in, right, it's going to be that these, teachers have had it, the kids have had it, the behaviors are out of control, things are not going the way that they should. Everyone's kind of putting their hands up in the air. And a lot of times too, it's hard because sometimes we take things personally. Yes. And I know as a teacher, because, like we just talked about, we don't want to fail, right? And I know as a teacher and even as a parent, like I look at my own kids and if I have one of my own children misbehaving, I'm like, what did I do? I'm failing as a mom, I'm failing as a wife, I'm failing as a teacher. Like we have these thoughts. So instead of looking at the behavior, I say, okay, what is the skill that that child's lacking? Because if I can
Mm.
target that lack of skill and I can teach them the skill that they're missing, well, then I've changed the behavior, right? I mean, it goes back to, I actually just wrote a blog post today about how I feel like sometimes we're on this hamster wheel of behavior where we have a kid who has, behavior intervention plan and all these things and supports in school, and then we stick them on a school bus
Yeah.
with 50 kids and one bus driver. And what happens? The kid misbehaves. And so the kid gets kicked off the bus. And now the kid gets driven for 2 weeks by their parents. And then after those 2 weeks, the kid gets put back on the bus. But we're not teaching that lack of skill. There's skills that that child is doing that's lacking. We're just trying to say, oh, okay, well, here's the consequence, right? Oh, you're going to eat by yourself because of whatever, or you're going to lose recess because of whatever. Well, if consequences just work to fix the behavior, then we'd see the behavior change. But the problem is that we're telling kids, okay, well, you've misbehaved. I'm not going to teach you the skill that you're missing. I'm just going to take away something from you, and you got to figure out what skill you're missing and how to fix it on your own. Right.
Oof.
It happens all the time. And even as a parent, sometimes
Yeah.
like, if you do that, I'm going to take this away, or you're going to lose iPad, or, like we do it all the time. It's a matter of thinking about, okay, well, what is the skill that this child's lacking? If I teach them that missing skill, that's when I'm going to see the behavior change, not based on the consequence. It's going to be based on what is the skill that they need to learn.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that when a kid misbehaves in a classroom setting, we isolate them.
Yeah.
And so it's so curious to me how that became the consequence of what is that teaching? How is that supporting? And consequences usually come from you or I as the adult thinking like, this is what I would need, or this is what the majority of people would need, but
Yeah.
never really thinking about what does that individual student need. So who are you mostly working with? Are you targeting younger student teachers, or do you work with high school teachers?
So most of my work is pre-K up through grade 6. I am a firm believer in early intervention. It works for math, it works for reading. It can also work for behavior. And I feel like that's
Yeah.
one spot that it kind of, when RTI was really big in education, it was math and reading and writing, right? We didn't really do anything for behavior. And now I know MTSS is coming out and they have like a behavior look to them, which is great. A lot of places are, rolling out MTSSB for behavior. But it also is important, though, for us to really think about if we can, front load these skills in kids when they're younger and teach them things like how to regulate themselves and when they're mad, what they should do and things like that, then as they get older, they have those skills and they know how to do that. So then the thought is that then you won't have kind of these bigger problems when you get to middle school and high school. And I feel like it's just so important. And I wish that, behavior would have a bigger seat at the MTSS table, because I think that if you look at some of our kids with the bigger behaviors, well, they're also having problems with academics because of their behaviors.
Right. It's like if we go back far enough to where the problem is originating
Yeah.
and we solve the original problem, then will we fix some of the future problems that we're playing catch up on all the
Yeah.
time?
And I feel like we need to be really careful about just putting a band-aid on the solution. And that happens a lot in behavior. And I've written my own behavior support plans that I talk about like 3 steps, right? And the first step is putting the band-aid on, giving that child access to the same function of the behavior that they were trying to get in a more palatable way, right? If the child needs to take a break, okay, great. They're going to use a break card for 2 weeks. And every time they show you the card, they're going to use it, which is a lot better than them throwing desks and chairs, right? But then what we do is we just try to fade that out. We don't actually teach them, well, what is the skill that they're missing? Like, what is the why behind the fact that they don't want to do work? Or what is the reason? Is it because they don't know how to ask for help? Is it because they don't understand the material? Is it because they don't know how to have grit and work through something that's difficult? Like, what is that skill that is missing? Because if I can teach them that skill, like if I can teach a child, okay, well, you don't have grit to like work through something that's difficult. Well, I can teach you how to do that. I can give you tools and techniques on how to do that, and then reward that behavior for them actually showing that skill. Well, then I can see that change over time instead of just trying to fade out the supports. Oftentimes we're putting the band-aid on it and then we're trying to fade out those supports, but because they haven't learned the missing skill, we can't fade out those supports.
The Band-Aid, it held the water back or it held the blood back, but it didn't let the body heal. And that, I
Exactly.
think, yeah, very, very fascinating. And I'm sort of trying to connect the dot of the Band-Aid that you put on yourself when you were struggling with your identity and belonging,
Yeah.
and the eating disorder or the, working out is like, is this going to fix what is missing? What's the skill that I was missing?
Yeah.
What do you think the skill was that you were missing at that age?
I think for myself that one of the skills that I was missing was knowing how to stand up for myself and
Mm,
how to kind of vocalize, especially to like the kids who are bullying me, how to be able to stand up for myself and be like, what you're doing is not okay.
yeah.
And this is not acceptable. I think another skill too that I really lacked for myself and something that I'm still working on is kind of that relationship with food and developing a healthy relationship and also just kind of developing a healthy body image.
Yeah.
And that's something that I know I've been very conscious of, especially as a mother to a
Yep.
young daughter, right? I'm very conscious of what I say around her. I'm very conscious about people telling her all the time, like, oh, you're so pretty. And I'm like, and you're also strong and you're smart and you're
Yeah.
sassy and you're independent, and like making sure that she kind of knows that she's more than just the outside image, right? And I also think, too, really at that age, I allowed so much around me to kind of take over. I allowed the media to kind of have a huge impact on how I viewed myself. I allowed looking at my mom and her relationship with food and her relationship with the diet culture to also affect me and how I viewed it. So, a skill that I really needed to work on was being able to kind of identify those, I would say, unhealthy habits and how to kind of change them, right? And I feel like as adults, we're constantly doing that. Even today, there's always something, an unhealthy habit. I mean, I just deleted a social media account off of my phone because I'm like, for my mental health right now, I can't do it. I need to take a break.
Right.
But knowing like, okay, this is okay for me to take a break from this, and like being able to kind of give myself grace and being like, okay, what I'm seeing is upsetting me, so I can't do that right now. I have to put my energy elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, and I almost think like sort of naming the fact that you had on the outside, like everything put together, on the inside, it was chaos, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, the kids who are potentially behavioring in chaos may just need another area to be filled, right? So it's like that I'm going to bubble up somewhere, and
Mhm.
it may be outward bubble, it may
Yeah.
be inward bubble, but like there's no person alive today who isn't struggling in some area. And I think so often, there are two thoughts that are coming up for me right now. One of the skills that we're teaching and taught, obviously, so well is comparison, right? We
Mhm.
are so good at that
Oh, yeah.
skill of comparison.
Yeah.
And when you and I were kids, it was magazines, and the magazines would go away, right? Like they weren't always in our face, but our phones now, that comparison muscle. And we as adults have to learn how to strengthen our confidence muscle to combat that comparison. And I think it's so fascinating that drama and being an actor, an actress was the way that you built that confidence. And I think there are a lot of ways, but that's one really interesting way that I think more kids, if we allowed them that opportunity to be somebody that they're not and see how
Yeah.
it feels and like step into that more often.
Yeah, I remember there was one character that I did, and I forget the name of the play, but she was very like hot-headed. And so like she would just like fly off the handle and like yell. And for myself, I was very stifled and I didn't do that. You ask my husband now, like he will tell you that I can sometimes fly off the handle, especially
Yep.
for myself. I know if I'm anxious about something, I definitely have a shorter fuse,
Yeah.
right? But it was really kind of interesting for me to kind of really I embraced that character so much because she stood up for herself, and I couldn't find the words for me to do that. And eventually I actually did with the bully who bullied me. One day I had enough, and I
Yeah.
actually walked up behind him and I smacked him in the back of the head as I walked by. And then I sat down in front of him, and he was like completely floored that I did anything. And he also stopped at that point. And I don't recommend violence for anyone, right? But at the same time, that was my bubbling over. And it was
Yeah.
also actually after that play that I had done where I was just like, I had enough. And I kind of almost channeled that character and was like, nope.
What you were doing is exactly what you're teaching when you build a skill. You were practicing, right?
Yeah.
You weren't practicing in front of the bully because that was too hard, but you were practicing as this other character.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that you said earlier, and that I am a firm believer is that everything that we struggle with is a skill that we haven't yet mastered, and we're building that skill. And so it's so awesome to hear it coming full circle is like you were literally practicing a skill that you needed and then you used it.
Yeah. Like you said, behavior is just the same way, right? Kiddos that are showing these behaviors is because of the skills that this has worked for them. And that's why they continue to do it. So they have to learn a different way in order to express themselves. They have to learn those things. And a lot of times, too, we often don't allow kids that time to practice.
Nope.
As educators, especially when you're in a classroom full of 25 and there's one of you, you don't have always the time to be proactive in every situation. But even if we just go up to if we know that a kid has a difficult time like during indoor recess, and you just go up to them before indoor recess starts and you say, hey, how can we practice sharing? Let's go ahead and show me a couple of different ways we can share, right? And the kid role plays with you a couple of ways and you're like, awesome, I can't wait to see that. And then you're kind of looking out for it because you're going to be looking out for that kid anyway, because he
Yeah.
or she could
Yeah.
fly off the handle. So you're kind of like watching, and then you see them use it and you're like, yeah, good job. Like that goes a lot further than me intervening after the child has already exploded and been like, well, remember we talked about ways to share 2 weeks ago and that amazing social emotional lesson that I did. We have to allow kids time to practice. And I know even
And
today, like I practice all the time. Like before I go to a professional development seminar, I am reciting it on my drive there, right? I'm reciting on my drive there. I'm reciting it, like I recite like different questions I think people might ask, like all of those things, because I want to be prepared and I want to be able to practice what I'm doing. So then that way I also can stand up in front of a group of people and be like, okay, here we go. Let's talk.
right. And recognizing that the adult who is proactively talking to that student, they had to practice too, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you do a really good job at talking about students needing skills and telling teachers that you do have tools. You just need to know which one to pull out, and you've got it. We just need to identify it. And I think that's half the battle, is not being able to identify all the tools that I have in my toolbox as an adult and as a child and throughout all of our entire existence. Like we are building our toolbox, and these kids, their toolbox is virtually empty. They've got a hammer and a screwdriver, and they don't always work.
Very true.
So, Melissa, if you could help a teen who maybe identifies with some of the struggles that you experienced, what advice would you give them?
I think the biggest piece of advice is you have to be able to find someone that you can talk to. And I know that that's one thing, especially with my own children. I'm very much of like, bring me whatever, right? Like, tell me whatever it is. I'm not going to get upset. I'm not going to get mad. I want to be that safe place, because as much as I love my parents and as great as they were, we didn't talk, we didn't communicate. And I feel like because I was also held on kind of this high pedestal of like, you have to get good grades, you have to do these things, you got to be a good kid. I didn't feel comfortable talking to my parents about certain issues because I didn't want them to be upset with me. I didn't want to disappoint them. I didn't want them to be mad at me. And so I feel like for a teen especially, like I wish I would have had someone that I could have gone to beforehand and felt comfortable with. And, luckily for me, I did end up finding someone that I could go to. And then that turned into a whole group of people. But really, that's the big one. And I think also too, if you're not comfortable with the people you hang out with, then like find a different group of people to hang out with. If you can't be yourself around them, then you got to be able to be like, okay, like let me go find a different crowd that I can hang out with because these aren't truly my people. And I know for myself, it took a while to kind of identify, well, who are my people? And like, who do I have stuff in common with? And I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about comparison. It's so important. I really like the Let Them theory by Mel Robbins. That has really kind of helped me kind of let go of some things. But I really think that it's important to know who to go to, where you can go to, and also to really work on that comparison component, especially because kids are being bombarded all day long with social media. And we all know, especially as an adult, well, people are only posting what they want you to see on social media. So their life may be falling apart behind those scenes, but they are hiding behind that mask. And I think that it's important for kids to realize that it is a mask and that you need to take with what you see with a grain of salt.
Yeah. So if people want to connect with you, what is the best way? Where can we find you? Talk to us about connecting.
Yes. So I have my website. It's educationadvisors.biz, B-I-Z. It's a great way to get a hold of me. On there is my email address. You can even set up time to just have a meeting with me, talk about the things that I'm doing, and I can learn more about what everyone else is doing because I love that. I love being connected to different people in all different avenues. So that's a great way. Also, too, I do have a LinkedIn as well. So you can find me under Melissa Davis on that. And then also my business is on there as well. Education Advisors LLC is on there as well on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sharing. And there's so many great pieces of information in here. So thank you again.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always wonderful talking with you.
Are you ready to help the young people in your life unlock their inner strength and step confidently into leadership? The new workbook from Peers Not Fears, Your Voice Matters, Uncovering Your Unique Leadership. It's designed to help teens see the leader in themselves, step by step. It's not just a workbook. It's the first step towards a ripple effect that could change lives. Let's turn today's teens into tomorrow's titans. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other parents who might benefit from this conversation. Together, we can support our teens in building healthy, positive relationships and become leaders of tomorrow. Until next time, I'm Lorraine Connell, and this is Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans.